The last thing I felt was the biting cold of the marble floor against my cheek and the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. I remembered the sound, a sickening, hollow thud that echoed through the foyer of our Newport estate. My body was a shattered mess at the base of the grand mahogany staircase, my breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. I looked up, my vision blurring, and saw Grant standing at the top of the landing. He wasn't rushing down to save me. He wasn't screaming for an ambulance. He was simply standing there, adjusting the gold cufflink on his left wrist with a terrifying, clinical calmness. "You really should have watched your step, Mallory," Grant said, his voice as cold as the Atlantic in winter. "But then again, you haven't been yourself lately, have you? The doctors will agree. Your instability has been a concern for months." Beside him, a shadow moved. Lydia, the woman he had moved into our guest house under the guise of a grieving cousin, stepped into the light. She didn't look grieving. She looked triumphant. She leaned her head on Grant's shoulder, her eyes meeting mine with a predatory gleam. "Is it over?" Lydia whispered. "Almost," Grant replied. I tried to scream, to curse them, but my lungs were filled with fire. The darkness rushed in, heavy and absolute, pulling me into a void where the pain finally stopped. Then, a sudden violent jolt. My eyes snapped open. I gasped, my hand flying to my throat, expecting to feel the crush of bone and the stickiness of blood. Instead, I felt soft silk. I wasn't at the bottom of the stairs. I was standing in the center of our sun-drenched drawing room, a crystal glass of sherry trembling in my hand. The air smelled of expensive beeswax and lilies. I looked down at my dress, a crisp, navy Chanel suit I hadn't worn in years. My heart was thundering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that told me I was very much alive. "Mallory? Darling, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost," a familiar, hated voice said. I froze. I slowly turned my head. Grant was standing by the fireplace, looking exactly as he had 2 years ago, younger, less gray at the temples, but with that same sharp, calculating edge to his smile. I'm fine," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and hollow. "Good," Grant said, stepping toward me. He took the glass from my hand and set it on the side table. "Because I have a surprise. My cousin, Lydia, arrived earlier than expected. Her husband's passing has left her quite distraught, and I've told her she can stay in the guest house until she finds her footing." The door opened. I watched, paralyzed, as Lydia walked in. She was wearing a modest black dress, her eyes downcast in a perfect performance of widowhood. "Mallory, darling, this is Lydia," Grant said, his hand sliding possessively onto the small of my back. "Lydia, this is my beautiful wife." "It is such an honor to finally meet you, Mallory," Lydia said, stepping forward to take my hands. Her skin was ice cold. "Grant has told me so much about your delicate nature." The words hit me like a physical blow. Delicate. That was the beginning of the gaslighting. The forgetfulness, the hallucinations, the slow, steady erosion of my sanity. In my past life, I had hugged her and offered her my home. This time I didn't flinch. I looked her straight in the eye, and for a split second, I saw her mask slip. She didn't expect the fire in my gaze. "Welcome to the family, Lydia," I said, my voice hardening into a blade. "I hope you find exactly what you're looking for here." The first week of my second chance felt like walking through a minefield. I had to play the part of the doting, oblivious wife, while every instinct screamed at me to run. Grant was already beginning his subtle campaign. He would move my car keys, hide my jewelry, and then find them in obvious places, sighing with a paternalistic pity that made my skin crawl. "You really should start writing things down, Mal," Grant said one morning, sliding a leather-bound journal across the breakfast table. "I'm worried the stress of Lydia's arrival is getting to you." "I'm perfectly fine, Grant," I said, sipping my tea. I had already installed a hidden camera in the kitchen. I knew exactly where he had put my keys. In fact, I've never felt more clear-headed. Lydia entered the room, wearing a silk robe that was far too expensive for a destitute widow. She sat down next to Grant, their shoulders brushing with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. "Mallory, I was thinking," Lydia said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Since I'm staying in the guest house, perhaps I could help you with the gardening? Grant says you've been neglecting the roses lately." "The roses are doing just fine, Lydia," I replied. "But if you're bored, I'm sure there are plenty of charity events that could use a fresh face." Grant's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to me pushing back. In the old life, I would have apologized and handed her the pruning shears. "Actually, Lydia," Grant said, his tone shifting, "I think you should focus on your recovery. Mallory, why don't you head into the city today? Take the afternoon for yourself. You look tired." He wanted me out of the house. He wanted time alone with her. I knew the pattern. In my past life, I would have gone, only to return and find evidence that I'd left the stove on or forgotten an appointment. "That sounds lovely," I lied. "In fact, I think I'll call my old attorney, Everett Sterling. I've been meaning to update the family trust anyway." The color drained from Grant's face. Everett was the one man Grant couldn't manipulate. We had been childhood sweethearts, a bond Grant had systematically destroyed by planting rumors of Everett's infidelity years ago. I had believed Grant then. I wouldn't make that mistake again. "Everett?" Grant asked, his voice tight. "I thought we agreed he was untrustworthy." "We agreed you didn't like him, Grant," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "But he's the best in the business. And I want to make sure our future is secure." I walked out of the room before he could respond. As I reached the foyer, I looked up at the grand staircase. 2 years from now, I was supposed to die at the bottom of those steps. "Not this time," I whispered to the empty air. Everett Sterling's office was a fortress of mahogany and leather, perched high above the bustle of Manhattan. When I walked in, he was standing at the window, his back to the door. He looked broader, steadier than I remembered. "Mallory," he said, turning around. The moment our eyes met, I felt a pang of grief, so sharp it nearly took my breath away. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and a deep, simmering hurt. "I haven't seen you in 3 years. Not since the wedding." "I know, Everett," I said, my voice trembling. "And I'm so sorry for that. I was misled." He walked toward me, his movements graceful and controlled. He didn't offer a hand. He just searched my face, his eyes landing on the faint dark circles under my eyes. "Grant told me you didn't want to see me. He said you were unwell and needed peace." "He lied," I said, the words finally breaking free. "He's been lying about everything. Everett, I need your help. I think my husband is trying to drive me insane. And I think he's trying to steal my family's fortune to fund his mistress." Everett's expression shifted from hurt to a cold, professional rage. He pulled out a chair for me. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." I told him about the gaslighting, about Lydia, and about the offshore accounts I had caught glimpses of on Grant's laptop. I didn't tell him I had died and come back. He was a man of law and logic, but I told him I had a premonition that Grant was planning to dispose of me. "Grant Vance is many things, but he isn't sloppy," Everett said, leaning back and tenting his fingers. "If he's moving money, he's doing it through shell companies. But he's arrogant. He thinks you aren't watching. He thinks I'm losing my mind." I corrected him. "Then we'll use that," Everett said, a dark glint in his eyes. "We'll play his game. You stay the perfect doting wife. Let him think the gaslighting is working. Meanwhile, I'll start a forensic audit of the Vance holdings. If he's funneling money to Lydia or anyone else, I'll find it." He reached across the desk and finally took my hand. His grip was warm, solid, and for the first time in 2 lives, I felt safe. "Why are you doing this, Everett?" I asked. "After everything I said to you, after how I pushed you away?" "Because you were the girl who taught me how to climb trees and skip stones, Mallory," he whispered. "And because I never believed a word he said about you. I was just waiting for you to see the truth." The following month was a masterclass in acting. I became the Mallory Grant wanted, flighty, easily confused, and utterly dependent on him. I lost my phone 3 times a week. I forgot to attend a lunch with the DAR. I even let Lydia comfort me when I pretended to have a panic attack over a missing pair of earrings. "It's okay, Mallory," Lydia said, her hand stroking my hair with a touch that made my skin crawl. We were in the drawing room, and she had found the earrings in my coat pocket, the coat she had been wearing 10 minutes earlier. "We're all here for you. You just need to rest." "I don't know what's wrong with me, Lydia." I sobbed into my hands, watching her through my fingers. She was smiling, a tiny, cruel curve of the lips. "I'm so lucky to have you both." Grant stood in the doorway, watching the scene with a satisfied expression. "I think it's time we discuss your power of attorney, Mal. Just as a precaution. In case you have another episode." "Whatever you think is best, Grant," I murmured. Behind the scenes, the real work was being done. Every night, while Grant and Lydia were in the guest house, thinking I was drugged on the sedatives Grant gave me, which I swapped for vitamin C, I was on the phone with Everett. "He's moved another $2 million, Everett told me one night, into an account in the Cayman Islands under the name LV Holdings. It's clearly for Lydia. But here's the beauty of it, Mallory. The account he's pulling from is actually a subsidiary of your family trust. He thinks he's merged them, but legally, he's just committing grand larceny." "Can we move it?" I asked. "Not yet," Everett said. "We need him to move more. We need him to empty his personal accounts into it, too. He's trying to consolidate everything so he can file for your mental incompetence and take control of the whole estate. Once he's moved his personal assets in there to protect them from your mismanagement, we'll trigger the clawback." "How long?" 2 weeks, Everett said. "Can you hold out that long?" "I can do anything for 2 weeks," I said, looking at the calendar. The date of the annual Vance Autumn Gala was approaching. In my past life, that was the night Grant had told me he was putting me in a sanatorium. "I'm coming to see you tomorrow," Everett said, his voice softening. "I'm coming as the family friend Grant thinks I am. We need to sign some papers in person." "Be careful, Everett," I said. "He's paranoid." "Let him be paranoid," Everett replied. "I'm a lawyer, Mallory. I thrive on paranoia." When Everett arrived at the estate the next afternoon, the air in the drawing room felt thick enough to choke on. The late-day sun slashed through the heavy velvet curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing around Grant, who stood by the crystal bar like a sentry. He was already on his second scotch, the ice clinking aggressively against the glass. Lydia was hovered in the corner, pretending to organize a vase of hydrangeas, but her eyes were fixed on the front door. Then, Everett stepped inside. He looked like a storm front in a bespoke charcoal suit, his presence so commanding that the room seemed to shrink. He wasn't just my childhood sweetheart anymore. He was the highest-paid legal mind on the East Coast, and he carried that power like a shield. "Sterling," Grant said, his voice tight and unwelcoming. "I didn't realize you and Mallory were still in contact. I thought we'd moved past these old associations." "Mallory reached out to me regarding some childhood property in the Berkshires," Everett said smoothly, his voice a low, steady rumble that made my heart skip. He set his leather briefcase on the mahogany table with a heavy thud. "I'm sure you understand, Grant. Old money needs old friends to look after the finer details." "Mallory isn't herself lately," Grant said, stepping forward and placing a possessive hand on my shoulder. His fingers dug into my collarbone, a subtle warning I knew all too well. "She's been confused. I'm handling all her affairs now to keep her from being overwhelmed." "Is that so?" Everett asked. He didn't look at Grant. He looked directly at me. His eyes were a deep, piercing blue, searching mine for the signal we had practiced. "Well, according to the Vance Sterling agreement signed by your father and Mallory's years ago, certain trusts can only be managed by a Sterling-vetted attorney. I'm just here to ensure the paperwork is in order before the gala. Standard procedure." I sat on the velvet sofa, fluttering my hands and looking slightly dazed. "Everett, did I sign something yesterday? I can't remember if I used the blue pen or the black one," I said, playing the part of the flighty, fading wife. "Just a few updates, Mallory," Everett said. He walked over and sat beside me, much closer than a typical attorney would. He opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents that smelled of fresh ink and high-stakes consequences. "Just sign here," Everett said, handing me a silver fountain pen. As I reached for it, his hand brushed mine. It wasn't just an accidental touch. His fingers lingered, warm and solid, squeezing my hand for a brief, electric second. That simple contact sent a jolt of fire through my veins, a reminder of the man who had truly loved me before the shadows took over. It was an anchor in the middle of a hurricane. "It's to protect your interest in the Newport house, Mallory. To make sure it stays exactly where it belongs." I signed the papers with a shaky hand, putting on a show of hesitation. Grant watched like a hawk, but he didn't realize that the document wasn't a property update at all. It was a formal transfer of authority that allowed Everett to act as my legal proxy in the event of an audit we were about to trigger the moment he walked out that door. "There," I said, handing the pen back. "I hope that's right, Everett. My head feels so heavy today." "You did perfectly, Mallory," Everett said, his voice softening with a genuine tenderness that he couldn't quite hide from his eyes. He stood up and snapped his briefcase shut. He turned to Grant, his expression hardening back into ice. "I'll see you at the gala, Grant. I hope the guest house is comfortable for your visitor." He flicked a glance at Lydia, who turned away, her face flushing a deep, guilty red. Once Everett left, the silence in the room was deafening. The moment the front door clicked shut, Grant's facade finally shattered. He grabbed my arm, his grip far rougher than before, jerking me toward him. "What did you just sign, Mallory?" he hissed, his breath smelling of expensive peat and cold fury. I don't know, Grant." He said it was for the house. Something about the taxes. I started to cry, letting the tears flow freely from the sheer adrenaline of the deception. "You're hurting me. Please, let go." He shoved me back onto the sofa with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You're useless. A shell of a woman. Lydia, take her upstairs and give her the sedative. I need to call the bank and see what that vulture Sterling is up to." As Lydia led me toward the grand staircase, her hand gripping my elbow with a smug, sisterly care, she leaned in close to my ear. "You're going away soon, Mallory," she whispered, her voice a poisonous thread. "To a very quiet place with white walls. And I'm going to enjoy every square inch of this house, and your husband when you're gone." "I'm sure you will, Lydia," I whispered back, a cold, sharp smile forming on my face where she couldn't see it. "I'm absolutely sure you will." 3 days before the gala, the moon was a sharp, silver sickle hanging over the Atlantic, casting long, skeletal shadows across the manicured lawns of the Newport estate. I had spent the evening in my bedroom, performing the role of the drugged wife to perfection. I had even allowed Grant to watch me swallow the bitter little pill he provided, though as soon as he turned his back, I had tucked it under my tongue and later spat it into the drain of the ensuite bathroom. I waited until I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of the front door closing and the sound of Grant's footsteps crunching on the gravel path toward the guest house. I counted to 60, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Then, I wrapped a dark silk shawl around my shoulders and slipped out the side entrance, moving through the shadows of the rose garden. The guest house was a miniature version of the main mansion, glowing with a warm, inviting light that felt like an insult. This was my father's legacy, and they were using it as their playground. I crept up to the French doors, my breath hitching as I pressed myself against the cold stone wall. The curtains weren't fully drawn. Inside, Grant and Lydia weren't acting like cousins. They were draped over each other on the velvet sofa, a bottle of my father's 1945 vintage port open on the table between them. Lydia was laughing, her head thrown back, her fingers tracing the line of Grant's jaw. "How much longer do I have to play the grieving widow, Grant?" Lydia asked, her voice clear through the glass. "I'm tired of wearing black and calling that empty-headed girl darling. It's exhausting." "Just 3 more days, my love," Grant said, his voice dropping into a low, intimate register that used to make me feel safe. Now it made me want to scream. The gala is the final act. Once the guests see her have one last episode in public, no one will question the commitment papers. I've already contacted the sanatorium in upstate. They have a very private wing for the incurably confused. I felt a surge of icy adrenaline. I pull my phone from my pocket, my fingers trembling as I hit the record button. I held it up to the gap in the curtains, the lens capturing the scene in high definition. "And the money?" Lydia asked, leaning forward to sip the port. "Is it moved?" "10 million, Grant said, a smug, self-satisfied grin spreading across his face. "I moved the final installment this afternoon into the LV Holdings account. Sterling is poking around like a persistent dog, but he's too late. By the time he realizes the trust has been emptied, we'll have dissolved the shell company and moved the funds into the joint venture account I set up in the Caymans. He'll be looking for a paper trail that doesn't exist." "And the other thing?" Lydia whispered, her eyes turning dark and sharp. "You said the sanatorium was Plan B." Grant tightened his grip on her waist, his expression hardening into something truly monstrous. "I've been thinking about the stairs, Lydia. A facility is expensive and carries the risk of a recovery. But a fall? An unstable woman, distraught by her own failing mind, losing her footing on that grand marble staircase. It's clean. It's permanent. The police won't even perform an autopsy once they see her medical records." "You're a genius, Grant," Lydia said, leaning in to kiss him. "I'm a man who knows how to protect what is mine," Grant replied. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. He was planning to kill me. Again. The exact same way. I didn't wait to hear more. I slipped back into the darkness, my feet flying over the grass until I reached the safety of the main house. I locked my bedroom door and immediately dialed Everett's private line. "I have it," I whispered into the receiver, my voice cracking. "I have the admission of the murder plot, the theft of the 10 million, and the name of the shell company. Everything, Everett. I have everything." "Transfer the files to the secure server right now," Everett said, his voice urgent and fiercely protective. "Mallory, listen to me.
Do not let him see you tonight.
If he suspects you know, he won't wait for the gala. Stay in your room. I'm triggering the audit and the asset freeze now. By the time the sun comes up, Grant Vance will be a king with a hollow crown. He'll be broke, and he won't even know it yet." "I'm ready, Everett," I said, looking at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The delicate girl was gone. In her place was a woman who was finally, lethally, awake. The Vance Autumn Gala was a battlefield disguised as a ballroom. The air inside the gilded hall glittered with the refraction of 1,000 diamonds and hummed with the polite, poisonous gossip of Newport society. I moved through the crowd in a gown of liquid silver lame, armor that clung to my body and caught the light like a drawn blade. My hair was swept up in an intricate twist, exposing the neck Grant planned to break. Grant was at my side, performing the role of the long-suffering, saintly husband with nauseating perfection. He held court near the ice sculpture, a champagne flute in one hand, the other resting possessively on my lower back, a gesture that looked supportive to onlookers, but felt like a shackle to me. "Mallory is having a stabilizing day," he murmured to Senator Davies and his pearl-clutching wife, offering a sad, brave smile. "We're just taking it 1 hour at a time. It's a heavy cross to bear, seeing such a brilliant mind fade, but family is everything." "You are an inspiration, Grant," Mrs. Davies sighed, eyeing me with theatrical pity. Lydia hovered just behind us, dressed in a crimson gown that was far too loud for a grieving cousin. She was practically vibrating with premature triumph, her eyes scanning the room as if she were already calculating the redecoration budget. She thought this was her coronation. She didn't realize it was her execution. Midway through the evening, Grant stepped up to the microphone on the bandstand. The room quieted, faces turning toward the man they believed controlled one of the largest fortunes on the East Coast. "Friends," Grant began, his voice thick with fabricated emotion. "This has been a difficult year for the Vance family. My beloved Mallory's health has been a challenge, but your support has meant the world to us. I'd like to propose a toast to endurance." He raised his glass. Before anyone could drink, the massive double doors at the end of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't a polite entrance. Everett Sterling stood framed in the doorway. He looked magnificent, a dark avenging angel in a tuxedo that put every other man in the room to shame. Flanking him were two men whose off-the-rack suits and grim expressions stood out like neon signs among the Newport elite. Federal agents don't blend in. Grant froze on stage, his glass halfway to his lips. The silence in the room curdled. Grant Vance. Everett's voice rang out, amplified by the acoustics of the ballroom. He didn't need a microphone. He walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. I apologize for the interruption, but we need to discuss your Cayman Islands portfolio. Specifically, the LV Holdings Shell Company. Grant laughed, a brittle, cracking sound. This is absurd, Sterling. This is hardly the time for business. The FBI disagrees, Everett said, stopping at the base of the stage. One of the agents stepped forward, flashing a badge that caught the chandelier light. They seem to think moving $10 million of your wife's trust fund to finance your mistress constitutes immediate federal wire fraud and money laundering. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. All eyes turned to Lydia, who turned the color of ash. She tried to back away toward the service exit, but the second agent was already there, blocking her path. And, Everett continued, his eyes locking onto Grant's pale face, there is also the matter of conspiracy to commit murder. We have the audio recordings from your guest house, Grant. The ones where you discuss the most efficient way to push Mallory down the stairs. I stepped away from Grant's side, moving to the edge of the stage. I looked down at him, letting the facade of the confused, weak wife drop completely. My gaze was clear, cold, and utterly sane. I'm not confused anymore, Grant, I said, my voice calm but carrying through the stunned silence. The agents moved onto the stage. Grant looked around wildly at the senators, the CEOs, the socialites he had spent his life trying to impress, begging for help with his eyes. He found only revulsion. They recoiled, distancing themselves from the radioactive ruin of his reputation. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, a sharp, satisfying sound that echoed off the marble floors, Grant lunged toward me, restrained only by the agent's grip. You bitch, he hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. You're nothing without me. You're insane. I leaned in close, so only he could hear the final nail in his coffin. Actually, Grant, I whispered, smiling for the first time that night. I'm the woman who owns the roof over your head, the shirt on your back, and the evidence that will bury you. I didn't just survive you, darling. I ended you. As they dragged him out one set of doors and a sobbing Lydia out the other, Everett walked up to the stage. He didn't say a word. He just held out his hand. I took it, feeling the solid, warm weight of his reality against mine, and we walked out of the ballroom together, leaving the wreckage of my past life behind us on the polished floor. The air on the deck of the Serafina was unlike anything I had breathed in 2 years. It was salt-thick and sharp, scrubbed clean by the Atlantic wind, and free from the suffocating scent of lilies and beeswax that had defined my life as a prisoner in my own home. I sat on a cheap lounge chair, my legs tucked under a cashmere throw, watching the sun heave itself over the horizon. The sky was a bruised purple fading into a brilliant, defiant gold, a new day that didn't belong to Grant Vance. I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of footsteps on the deck. I didn't flinch. I didn't check to see if I had forgotten anything. I simply waited, knowing exactly who was coming. You're up early, Everett said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that seemed to vibrate right through the deck and into my bones. He stepped into the light, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He looked different out here, away from the marble halls of Newport. He wore a simple navy sweater with the sleeves pushed back, his jaw shadowed with a few days of stubble. He looked like the boy I had loved at 16, only tempered by the steel of the man he had become. I didn't want to miss the first morning that felt entirely mine, I said, reaching out to take the mug he offered. Our fingers brushed, a slow, intentional contact that sent a wave of genuine warmth through me. Unlike Grant's touches, which always felt like a predator marking its territory, Everett's touch felt like a conversation. It was an invitation, not a command. I have the final report from the city, Everett said, sitting on the edge of my lounger. He leaned in, his shoulder pressing against mine, a solid and comforting weight. The news cycle is a total eclipse. The fall of the House of Vance is the only headline from New York to London. Grant's lawyers tried to argue for bail, but the judge saw the recording of the staircase plot. He's being held in a high-security wing until the trial. He's broke, Mallory. Every account he touched has been clawed back by the trust. And Lydia? I asked, looking out at the shimmering water. She's singing like a bird, Everett said with a grim smile. She traded every detail of Grant's offshore shell companies for a reduced sentence. She's terrified of him now. She realizes she was just another tool he was planning to discard once the money was dry. I let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for 2 lifetimes finally began to dissolve. I thought I would feel more vengeful, but I just feel light, like I've finally stepped off those stairs. Everett set his coffee down and turned to me, his expression softening into something so raw and tender it made my throat ache. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw before his hand came to rest at the nape of my neck. "You did it, Mallory," he whispered, his eyes searching mine. "You fought your way back from the dark. I spent years thinking I'd lost you to a shadow. I didn't think I'd ever get to see the sun on your face like this again." "I never left you, Everett," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Even when I was lost, I was looking for the way back to the girl I was when I was with you." He leaned in, and when his lips met mine, it was a slow, deep homecoming. It tasted of salt air and second chances. It wasn't a kiss of possession. It was a kiss of relief, of a decade's worth of unspoken words finally finding their voice. I tangled my fingers in his hair, pulling him closer, letting the heat of him anchor me to the present. For the first time, there was no fear, no hidden agenda, and no poison, just the steady, honest heartbeat of the man who had waited for me to save myself. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against mine. "Where to now, Mallory? The world is a very large place, and you own quite a bit of it again." I looked out at the horizon, where the yacht was cutting a white line through the blue. I felt the weight of my reclaimed fortune, my reclaimed name, and most importantly, my reclaimed soul. "Anywhere the wind takes us," I said, a genuine, joyful smile breaking across my face. "As long as we're moving forward." "I can handle that," Everett said, his arm sliding around me to pull me flush against his side. I leaned my head on his shoulder, watching the Newport shoreline vanish into a tiny, insignificant speck. The grand staircase was a ghost. The gaslighting was a dead language. I was Mallory Vance, and for the first time in 2 lives, the path ahead was perfectly, beautifully clear.